All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Christina Caesar, and I'll be moderating today's session. Today's webinar will explore Azure Active Directory, which Adrian, in a few moments, will prove to you is your new all-up identity management solution. Just a reminder that today's session is being recorded, and please make sure to send any questions through the Q&A function within Teams. Just a little bit about us. Synergy Technical is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have clients in over 70 countries and all 50 states and manage over 2 million licenses of Microsoft 365 for our clients through our licensing and managed services practice. In February 2020, we were awarded the Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year Award. Always a mouthful. And a large part of that success is the work done by today's presenter, Adrian Amos. So Adrian is a deep-level Microsoft security expert who has had the honor of running both productivity and security workshops at Microsoft Ignite. So, as always, perfect person to be leading today's webinar. And I know some of the attendees on today, if you've joined his previous sessions, you know he gets really enthusiastic about this stuff. So, Adrian, with that, if you want to kick it off, I'm going to hand it over to you. I can see you laughing. We'll get started.
Yeah, I appreciate you setting the bar good and high for me to have to bring the energy today. But I actually am really excited to be talking about this. If you've attended any of my immersion experiences in the past, or heard me talking at any of the tech summits or at Ignite, this is a conversation that's been 5 years in the making, and I've been really excited about it, in particular in the last couple of years, because while it's taken 5 years to get this conversation going, it's really starting to happen a lot in a lot of organizations. Active Directory as a tool is becoming, it's becoming a little bit old-fashioned, and the identity space is really kind of moving beyond the borders of the data center. And as I was starting to put this conversation together and try to frame it out in a way that would make a logical, structured sense to get into it, I started looking around trying to decide how best to frame the conversation of what even is an identity and access management solution. And I stumbled across a perfect forum post that I think really encapsulates the concept and frames the question really well of why identity and access management. So I thought I'd share that and build on this frame to kind of make the entire discussion, a little bit more understandable. So this was asked way back in May of 2017. The question is, obviously, you're going to get a copy of the deck here too, but I am going to read a little bit here. Very new to identity and access management. There are multiple tools available in the market. From a Microsoft background, was under the impression that some of the stuff that IAM tools do can be done in Active Directory. Struggling to understand how Active Directory is different, and that's one we get a lot, right? Can I integrate these tools with Active Directory? Is IAM for internal users, which are stored in Active Directory? If there are reasons or features that IAM provides or does in addition to AD, how does this interaction work? So, for example, my server credentials are always checked against AD. It cannot be checked against an IAM database. Does that mean that IAM uses AD as a repository? So what I thought we might do then is have a little conversation about what AD is, right? How it works, how it grows, and then compare that to how Azure AD works and how it fits into its own ecosystem. So Active Directory is defined by a wonderful website called Techopedia as a hierarchical and internal storage of organizational data in a centralized location. It's a searchable directory of users, computers, groups, and policies that service identity to an organization. In the simplest of scenarios, it's a directory server or domain controller. With user and computer accounts for an internal company, everybody has equal access to log on to any of the computers except for the servers. It can get more complicated, right? We've seen AD start very simple with like a little simple trust here, and then start to grow and get a little bit more complicated, right? So we get more directory servers, more types of servers, more types of users moving in between organizational boundaries. We start to get replication challenges. We get to a certain size, and then we actually have to upsize our server licensing to deal with the spaghetti and rat's nest that becomes an extremely complicated Active Directory replication topology. Then we end up with all kinds of weird challenges like replication islands and super crazy stuff like that. But it does give us the ability to be extremely granular about how computers behave, how users are able to interact with devices and with certain systems inside the environment. It is actually immensely scalable, and we will address that conversation. Scalability is like my super jam, and we will talk about scalability in terms of on-prem and in the cloud. But Active Directory is everywhere. Like every major organization in the world has Active Directory. And it's built on technologies that are pretty old. So AD itself is now a legal adult, right? In every nation in the world, it's 21 years old. It needs to get out of the house and get a job. But it's also built on an authentication protocol that was finalized in September of 1993. Yeah, Kerberos v5, the venerable authentication protocol that we still use in Active Directory today, was finalized the same month I guess started classes in college. So I finished high school in 1993, and Kerberos v5 still seemed like a pretty neat idea back then. The challenge that we have with Kerberos v5, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is that it is just an authentication protocol. And authentication is a critical part of system security, but it's not the whole story anymore. So let's talk about the development lifecycle then of AD, right? So we're authenticating with a protocol that dates back to 1993 in its final version. Incidentally, it was initiated in 19 was when the first RFCs for Kerberos were released. So it's got some cycles on it, right? It's a little bit old. But if we look at Microsoft's actual current guidance on what's new in Active Directory domain services, forget the 2016 part, because you'll notice this is just in the general identity and access and Active Directory domain services area, right? There's really nothing here. Active Directory's development has stalled, and it has been stalled since the release of Windows Server 2016. This article was published almost a year before the release of Windows Server 2019, and of the concepts that are in here as new ideas, 2 of them directly reference Azure Active Directory, and 1 of them requires you to bolt on an additional product to make it light up. So if we look at what Active Directory is, can we decide that it is an identity and access management solution? So let's talk about what the definitions are of that. I kind of scoured the internet a little bit here and came up with probably about 15, but I whittled it down to these 3 of definitions of what is identity and access management. There's really no alignment, but there's some general consensus around what it means, and I'm going to default to the Microsoft definition, although I've given you a couple of additional ones here too. But at its core, the idea is we're going to have processes, policies, and technologies that facilitate the management of identities and what they access. It includes many components supporting authentication and authorization, right? That's the critical part. Identity, access, authentication, and authorization. And if we come down here and look at the very last one, the overarching goal of IAM is to protect enterprise assets by ensuring that only the right users can access them within the right contexts. And that's what's really critical to defining an IAM solution. So is AD an IAM? It is not. Active Directory supports authentication, but not authorization. It can be made to handle business processes, but it can't do it by itself, right? We see organizations creating home applications to ingest users from a third-party HR system, and you go from any one company to any other company, and while they may be doing roughly the same thing, some of them are doing it in PowerShell, some of it in VB scripts, some of it in custom applications, some of it in all sorts of different ways. So we can do some of the core elements, right? We can automate some business processes. We can even do logging and monitoring. But when you get right down to it, Active Directory, it's in most cases, does not actually manage access to resources, except for Exchange and maybe SQL. Most things can opt into an Active Directory management space, but they don't have to use it necessarily. Whereas in Azure AD, everything is directly consuming that identity space. So again, all of these definitions preclude Active Directory domain services. But since I'm leading with the Microsoft definition of IAM, let's look at what they consider to be some of the most common uses for an IAM. Some of these, I mean, it's a nice, big, beautiful slide, and I really thank Microsoft for letting me borrow this slide. Some of these seem very obvious, right? The ideas of one identity, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, easy integrations, those are pretty basic, right? Even if they're already exceeding what we're able to do with Active Directory on premises. But group-based licensing, right? Identity protection with adaptive hardening, self-service for both user and device enrollment. Identity lifecycle management, where the change starts from an external HR system with automatic consumption capabilities into Azure AD, and then servicing straight on through to third-party SaaS applications. And then building on full entitlement and management capabilities and reporting tools too, where I don't have to go to 20 domain controllers and check an individual netlogon.log file to see where the user logged in. Oh, whoops, they came in over VPN that day. I guess I got to go check the radius logs too. It's all unified. It's all simplified. Reporting is right there. And that's start to see the real power of a true integrated identity and access management solution, which is convenient because, as it turns out, the White House just released an executive order on May 13th aimed at strengthening digital defenses as a direct result of both the SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline attacks. So in it are specific instructions for agencies to move beyond traditional authentication-based mechanisms of just username and password and start looking at user and entity behavioral analytics. And really specifically what we want out of that is that second part, that authorization and the right context part. So I really actually appreciate that the government is giving me ammunition to back up this whole argument. But right now, this is an absolutely critical thing, right? We really can't ignore this anymore. So what is Azure AD and how does it meet these requirements, right? So we talked about some of the use cases there, but what Azure AD brings us is the ability to unify authentication, authorization, administration at a single glass, right? It's not the Active Directory center where you still have to. This is truly, it's all in one space, and we can apply really advanced governance capabilities. And I'm so hoping that I'll be able to get through enough of this to be able to give you guys a little bit of a demo in my favorite space in Azure AD now, which is identity governance, but self-service management and actual customer side IAM capabilities too. So prior to where we are right now and where we've been for about the last 6 months or so, we used to have to completely separate the ideas of enterprise identity and access management and customer-facing identity and access management. So your user database had to be totally separate. But now, well, actually, let's even go back and say that used to be two separate products, right? There was Azure AD B2B, and then there was B2C. So you had two different types of external identities. Well, now that whole space has been unified into one, Azure AD external identities, and we can actually consume them and work with them as if they were normal members of our organization. Internally servicing them applications and servicing them bits of cloud infrastructure and reporting and logging on their capabilities and ingesting their own external risk controls as well. So we have now a unified view for one user bringing one access to do everything across multiple organizations and getting the logging and all that reported into a single space. Now, obviously, there are different license levels that come into play in all this. And I'm not going to dig too deep into that, but understand that even at the basic, simply included with Office 365 level, there are controls across all of these spaces that are designed to help get you up and running and be safe and secure. Some of the more advanced, analytics capabilities, those do pop up at later and higher spaces. But not digging too deep in on the licensing today, what we really want to do is just focus on the idea that there's so much more that we can do, and it's across all these different areas. Some of these things don't even actually exist in AD, right? And sticking with the Microsoft conversation, right? Why would we want to stick with the Microsoft space? Well, they're actually doing a really daggone good job of it, right? The access management space, you can see Microsoft is the farthest over in completeness of vision. These Gartner reports, they come out pretty regularly. And again, I appreciate Microsoft lending me this slide. But while it might seem like we're really only here to talk about the access management portion of it today, the reality is that all of these things bear on each other, right? So endpoint protection and unified endpoint management, that information gets reported back into Azure Active Directory to help us make decisions about that contextual element that we talked about, the right users with the right context. So conditional access controls, allowing us to decide that, hey, this device that I usually trust, I can't trust it today because it looks like it may be infected with malware, right? So giving us the ability to make these intelligent point of time decisions. And actually, we now have continuous access evaluation that's just rolling out into preview like this week. So, it's a constant reassessment and constant philosophy and constant reinforcing of zero trust all the time. You think you're going to claim that you are who you say you are, with the right controls, with the right permissions, coming from the right computer at the right time from the right country? Prove it. Keep proving it over and over and over again. And Microsoft has demonstrated repeatedly that they have the completeness of vision and its strategic, ability to execute and all that fun stuff that is far in excess of what a lot of other players in the space can do. Now, I did mention that we would talk about the difference in scalability and some of the different controls, right? My goal in this is not to tell you that Active Directory is a terrible product, right? I have been supporting it for 20-ish years now, and there are still some things that it does very well, but Azure AD in most cases can build on those capabilities and do them better. I'm not going to drain these. You will get a copy of this deck, but I will kind of talk through some of these things that are fundamentally different, right? So I mentioned that, with Active Directory, we're going to manually create our users or build some sort of a process that's generally going to be homegrown, or it's going to rely on some integration point with another application. In Azure AD, we can do that, but we can also actually have automated creation of accounts coming from external SaaS HR systems, and then take that actual single identity and use that to provision access into third-party applications. So it is truly one identity object. If you disable that identity object anywhere, it goes away the rest of the way down the chain, right? And again, with that continuous access evaluation, even disabling an account is basically an immediate effect. Differences in terms of how we provision and manage external identities. On premises, it's not fun, right? X.509 kind of has become a default, but that can produce problems down the road with migration effects, or even like building a whole dedicated external for us. You're talking about a lot of infrastructure to deal with somebody wanting guest access to something, right? In Azure AD, it's just native. They just bring their account and they get in and they use your stuff. And then you say, I don't like that anymore, and you make them go away, right? It's easy. Entitlement management in groups. In AD, everything is a group, whereas in Azure AD, we actually have dedicated roles. And one of my absolute favorite differences between the way this works on premises and in the cloud has to do with the immutable isAdmin attribute in Active Directory. If a user in your environment is ever assigned any one of the built-in administrative groups that exist in Active Directory, the immutable flag isAdmin changes from 0 to 1, and you cannot change it back. It is immutable. Whereas in Azure Active Directory, we have the ability to do time-bound and just-in-time and approval and workflow-based administrative accesses through built-in through roles. And instead of assigning a user to a group, we're assigning the user to a role. And that role, if they don't have it at that moment, if they haven't elevated their access for that moment, it's not reportable. So somebody getting into your Active Directory and running an LDAP query for any user where the isAdmin flag equals 1 will tell them exactly which users have potential admin access. In Azure Active Directory, the user has to be holding that role at that time for that result to come back with anything positive that they can build on. So there's a totally fundamental difference of an approach in terms of how we're going to secure access, how we're going to reduce those attack surfaces, and really make a dramatic impact in terms of like our scalability, our reporting, and our controls. Credential management, I mean, we talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Is daggone 1993 all over again in Active Directory for credential management, whereas in Azure AD we have intelligent password protection. We're blocking common phrases and substitutions, and we can actually upload our own custom phrases that we want to block out of there too. We're building natively on MFA and passwordless capabilities. We do one-time passcodes for users, and we also give them a self-service password reset option so that we're reducing help desk costs by up to 30%. Again, I'm not super going to drain these slides right here, but we do have fundamental differences in how we support and actually service applications, right? In AD, applications can consume Active Directory. In Azure AD, applications are built on access rights within Azure AD. It's not something that you bolt on and bring to the party later. It's just how it's done. And even with mobile devices, And we run the risk of talking about multiple different products and trying to sell them as one thing, but the reality is they are all one thing. They're all part of the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem. So Intune becomes integrated directly with Azure AD, which means that anything any user is going to do with a device is going to be compared against Azure AD to, again, go back to that context, that authorization part of it. Sure, the device is registered, but it's not okay right now because it's running the wrong patch level or something like that, right? Dramatic reductions in things like ransomware attacks because a device simply can't get on the network because it's not at the right patch level, right? We can do all kinds of great things here. But I do want to talk a little bit about service limits because, again, my point is not to tell you that AD is gone. It's not gone. And in fact, there are some things that in like raw limits, Azure AD is just like, whoa, dude, that's big, right? AD, a single domain controller can bring in over 2 billion objects into your Active Directory. I mean, like, hold on one second here. Am I still here? Christina, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, you just froze for a hot second.
All right.
You're good.
All right, cool. I just want to make sure I got the little bing bong sound here that I was offline. Anyway, so in terms of absolute service limits, right, a domain controller can bring in 2 billion people or objects or whatever to the party. That's a huge number. That vastly exceeds the total number of objects that can exist in your Azure Active Directory by default. So when you move up into the paid tiers, right, you can have 300,000 total objects by default. You can always call Microsoft and say you'd like it to be raised a little bit, but in Active Directory, you know, although there is a 5,000 maximum user limit for a group recommended, Microsoft has tested internally successfully putting 500 million users into a single group. Why not? I mean, you know, obviously that's far, again, in excess of the service limits of total for Azure Active Directory. But realistically, of all the service limits that are on this page, I have never heard of a company running over any of them in either space. So if you're looking at any of these and nodding your head and saying, yep, I've been there, the chances are that you're probably actually in the right solution for you as it is. It's exceedingly rare, like maybe the
Oh, I lost Adrian really quick. I'm sorry. Adrian, I think we had a slight issue with your audio just now.
Can you hear me now? Am I back now?
You're back now. I'm sorry. We lost. Yeah, you dropped for a sec. But oh.
My apologies. I don't know quite what happened there, but anyway, service limits, if you're running across them, the hats off to you because you are already running a gigantic directory infrastructure. Most of these are not impactful, but right, some of the things that are service limits in Active Directory, they're not even things in Azure AD, right? There is no limit on the number of groups to which an object can belong. And things like group expiration simply don't exist in Active Directory. We can set policies that say groups are only going to exist upon creation for 90 days and allow an owner of that group to come in at 45 days and say, kick this out a little bit longer, we're going to need this longer. And that's a great way to start leveraging governance on the data to which that group owns, right? You create a group, a team, that team you know is going to be time bound. You have data requirements or data retention requirements. If you just time bound the group, everything they own goes away at the end of it, right? It's super simple and it helps prevent that Active Directory sprawl that we can see in a lot of bigger organizations. So again, my goal here was not to drain all these lists. I do want to acknowledge that there are some limitations in any identity management solution. There always going to be limitations, but What I do enjoy, though, and I'm going to jump over to actually showing you guys a live demo here in just a moment, but what I do enjoy is that all of our control surfaces for Azure Active Directory are neatly nestled up into this one space, right? The Azure AD Admin Center at aad.portal.azure.com conveniently brings together all of the dashboards that we would generally use to do account management, to light up the enterprise applications that are integrated with Azure Active Directory, to do our identity governance, and I really hope we get time to play in this space today, to do the identity protections and privileged identity management that's so critical to a modern combination of access and authorization. So obviously, administration is one side, but security is another. And this is where we start to see that power of that converged full Microsoft 365 experience, right? If I look at it as just Azure AD, okay, well, that's great. It does a lot, but it also directly and natively ties into all of these other signals and data sources that are coming together. The entire Microsoft 365 system, if you can call it a system, is meant to be an ecosystem that shares data. So as we start jumping into the Microsoft security dashboard, we're going to see user risk that's coming directly out of Azure AD, correlated against users with threat detections that is coming from another source. We're going to see OAuth applications and threat analytics and devices and compliance and all that stuff converged into one space, so that as we start to chase a problem, we have all the correlations and all the data that we need presented conveniently to us. And this is made a little bit clearer in the recent release of the new Microsoft Cloud App Security Reference Architecture sheet. We can see that all of these things fit together to kind of build the experience of what it means to be or to manage users in the Microsoft 365 space, right? We have our behavioral analytics sitting down here as a built-in part of the Azure Active Directory component. We have all of these other elements that are coming around here to discover how our users are working with data, what application or what data we need to protect, what threats are trying to get in, how to secure the access and make sure that we have ongoing secure posture management. And all of this signal data is integrated into one consolidated view. Now, with that said, I am going to jump over into my demo tenant, which I think is right here. Fantastic. Yes. All right. Let me maximize this guy. And I will start with the administration part of it, just like I did in the deck here, and then I'm going to jump over into the security side of it. So I did mention that, you know, within the Azure AD space, we have a lot of controls here. We have the ability to build administrative units for granting granular control of administration. This is a little bit like what we've done traditionally with OUs, except they're AUs now. And it's important to distinguish between the two, right? They might provide similar functionality, but they work in a very different way. One of the things that I really struggled to get my head around when I went from AD to Azure AD was that it's flat, right? We would organize all of our users and groups and devices and everything in AD into organizational units. And we'd apply policies to those OUs and everything worked out pretty well. The problem that we get into, though, when we do that is it's a very classic problem that we see a lot. Every 3 to 5 years, you're going to get a new management team that's going to say, wait, we organize our entire structure by department. Why don't we do it by location? Or wait, we do it by location. Why aren't we doing this by like major project, major working group, major whatever? Oh, well, we're planning on selling off that unit. Why don't we put all those users? And then what ends up happening is Active Directory gets re-architected in place every 3 to 5 years. Somebody has to go back through and figure out how all the GPOs work and rebuild all that, or it just gets abandoned, right? And we start adding on things and using WMI filters instead to make sure that only the right groups and users get the right policies. And Active Directory just kind of grows like my backyard right now, desperately in need of a mow, and some rain wouldn't hurt either. But what we can do with AUs is a little bit different. So Azure Active Directory is flat. I can't nest my users down through 15 OUs to make sure that this GPO gets there and that we block inheritance on this one. No. But I can put my users into up to 30 different administrative units. So I might have a bunch of users that are all Contoso employees, right? And that's fine. And maybe I do things that are like giving them a standard desktop image or even giving them standard applications. But when I want to start giving out very granular controls or even allowing somebody to manage components like who gets what licenses, maybe I decide that Tailspin Toys, as a fully managed and owned subsidiary, I want these users to have a slightly different experience. I want them to be administered by somebody who is a local admin at the Tailspin administrative unit level. Similarly, I might have users that are in California, and I might have hired in a California admin to do some things for those users. I might have a laboratory admin unit where they're going to have different licenses that allow them to do different things because they're laboratory users, right? So when the traditional AD space, I would have to decide which OU to put them in and then filter things down to them. In this space, they can be in 30 admin units if I want to, and I can get the right different administrators in to give them the right things with the right licenses, with the right whatever, and I don't have to worry about finding that down in my infrastructure. I don't ever have to worry about an accidental drag and drop either, where I drop an OU into another OU and end up with all sorts of exotic results. But again, from right here in this one space, I'm not looking at 15 DCs for their sign-in logs. I'm not looking at 15 DCs for their audit logs, or even now, we now have provisioning logs right here, right? Did an admin log in, create another admin for themselves, log out, and then start using that new admin account to sidestep my security processes? Well, I can check, right? Can't do that in AD. I mean, it's there if you know how to look for it, but you got to know how to look for it. You got to know what you're looking for. Here, it's all just here. We can also directly assign our licenses out to users or assign them out to groups. Again, all of this is natively and directly tied into Azure AD itself. And then when it comes to managing privileged identities, this is one of the places I was mentioning, like that whole isAdmin attribute, right? In privileged identity management, we have the ability to take all of our Azure AD roles and get active reporting on how those roles are being used, see how many people in the organization are assigned these roles in the first place. We can make some very specific choices about how users are able to request access to these roles. So we can create custom roles if we want to, or if I even come down here and look at Global Administrator, you can see that there are 23 people who are eligible to hold this role, but they do not hold it right now. Only one person holds it right now, and it is the MOD admin. And if I want to make some very specific choices about how access to this role is granted, I can come in here and set the maximum duration that this role can be held. If I activate this role right now, it'll be gone in 1 hour, and I don't have to worry about going back in and turning it back off. I can even come back out here and say that I want to make somebody in the organization, I can assign this role to a group, right? I can assign it to an individual user. I happen to know that everybody has it right now, but maybe I want Adele to only have the ability to request this access through the end of the month. I know that on June 1, actually, no, oh yeah, okay, look at that. Do it the other way around. Starting June 1 and going through June 30, Adele will be able to request access to this role. So if I do that right there, we're going to have her on board for the month of June, and she'll be able to request access to that role. And I can see right here that these things are time bound. Oh, well, she already has it. So if it weren't already time bound, I can see when the access capability would start, when it would stop. I can see if it's been used, if it's been lit up. Anytime that somebody's done this in the last 24 hours or so, I'm going to be able to get in and see that kind of fun stuff. But again, because these users don't hold this role right now, if I go over to the admin.microsoft.com space and search for my admins, they're not listed. So let me see. Let me show you this. All right. Saved links and all that fun stuff. I live in the message center. It's kind of my favorite space. So if I go to my active users in admin.microsoft.com and I do a search for global admins, you might remember seeing that I have 23 some people who have that ability to request that, right? If I come over here to roles by assignment, or 21 users, actually 23 are eligible to be global admins, which means everybody in the company best practice is being followed here. If I come to filter and I filter on global admins, Azure Active Directory is not reporting that those people are admins because they are not admins right now. And if I activated one of these people, you would see that list grow by 1. It's super clean, super easy to do. The other thing that's really important in here too is that we actually have access reviews built into this space. So we can actually set up access reviews to go out and query people who hold a role, people who have access to a group, people who have whatever it is, the thing that we're doing, and we can actually have the system ask them, do you need to continue having access to this? We can assign reviewers, we can do all kinds of things. We can set this up to happen quarterly, monthly, whatever makes your auditors happy, right? And then once it's complete, if the users ignore it, well, maybe they lose access to the thing, right? Or maybe if they ignore it, it goes to their manager or to some other person who's responsible for that resource. And we can decide then what to do with that access if the users have said either I don't need it anymore, have it automatically taken away, or I don't have time for this request, again, have it automatically taken away. It's reducing a lot of the overhead of administering security roles in your on-premises Active Directory organization, because I will tell you, in 20 years of doing AD on-prem, whenever the auditors came through and said, who are your global admins and do they need that access? If you ask them all, yes, they all need that access and they're going to always need that access. And how dare you ask them if they would mind terribly giving it up? They always want to ask for the most access they can get. Anyway, I did say I was desperately hoping we would have time to cover identity governance, and I'm so excited because this is one of my favorite spaces in identity management in the cloud. This is a fundamental difference in terms of how we can do this in the cloud versus how we did it on-prem. And the funny thing is, even though it's a fundamentally different method, it actually builds on some of the best practices in AD to do its thing, right? So go way back to our early days of Active Directory administration when we first learned that there were 3 different types of security groups we could create in Active Directory. We had domain local groups, domain global groups, and we had universal groups. We're going to ignore universal groups because nobody ever knew what that was for. But it turns out a lot of people didn't quite fully get what domain local versus domain global were for. 5 internet points to anybody who does remember, because what domain local groups were designed to do. So again, we have our file server sitting over here and it's serving up some SMB share, right? We would take our domain local groups and assign a read group, a write group, and maybe a modify group. 3 separate groups to have 3 different ACL levels of access into that share or that NTFS volume, whatever. Then we would go over here on the other side and create a domain global group to hold the users who would then be assigned to one of the domain local groups to give them access into the resource. So users are added to domain global groups as a role. Domain global groups are then added to domain local groups to give them specific access to a resource. If you ever did that, you know how incredibly complicated that was. And it never scaled, right? Because the second a user calls up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you have a frazzled help desk person who's trying to figure out how they can get into this system, they're just going to stuff them in the domain local group and you've lost control and you're never going to get it back. Barring extremely strenuous security processes, you're never going to get back to a pristine idea of users go in domain global groups, resources go in domain local groups. But it doesn't matter when we do it this way. What we have the ability to do with identity governance is manage entitlements. We can manage access with, again, those same kind of access reviews that we can do for administrative access. We can actually do for group memberships and entitlement management. And again, this now also includes that privilege identity management component too. So what we do in this case is with identity governance, we reach out to all of our different departments and we say, give us your resources, right? What are the resources that you work with? So for R&D, they say, okay, we're going to put together an access or a list of resources. And those resources are going to include applications, they're going to include SharePoint sites, they're going to include groups and teams that are managed in Azure Active Directory. They're going to take all of these applications and all these resources and all this fun stuff, and let's just say we're going to say, well, actually, let's do it with an application. They're going to give the R&D group is going to have access to clip training, and that's going to be part of their published set of resources. When they go to, or when we as IT go to create a role in the organization, we can actually name roles and assign resources from these catalogs into these roles and assign a user directly to this role. So now we can build a role called sales contractor, and we can give it a convenient description, right? We're not hiring sales folks anymore. We're going to outsource the whole concept of this. We're going to pull objects from the sales and marketing catalog, and we're going to give these sales contractor role holders these roles within these resources. So maybe we gave them the brand site, but we've decided that they're going to be visitors in that site. We've given them the Salesforce application. They're going to be standard users. We could give them admin if we wanted to, if we're flying that close to the sun. Then we're going to define policies for how a user can gain access to this sales contractor package. Because our goal when we onboard this person is to just give them a package, get them up and running, and let them go, right? So in our position here, we are surfacing a package of resources to a person and allowing them to request approval. There's an approval process here. There's a second stage approval process, and we can even present them with security questions that they must answer in order to gain access to this package. So we can build all of that into the process, set up who is allowed even to do the request of access into this package, and then we can monitor on an ongoing basis to see who has it right now. Or we can actually come in here and just simply manually assign it to somebody. And doing all of this allows us to get out of the business of managing users and managing access and turns it back over to role admins. So essentially, like if you've got a director of sales, why are you in IT managing what their salespeople have access to? Let them do it. It's their package, right? That's their problem. Let them get into it. Self-service, baby, let them go, right? Don't manage all this stuff for them. If you give them the tools, they will use the tools and they will go on and they will be happy about it. And then you'll be able to see the requests for access. You'll be able to conveniently run and continue doing these ongoing access reviews right out of it. So here we go. We've got this access review on the sales contractors, right? And this is actually a part of the policy itself that defines it, is there has to be an ongoing review to make sure every 90 days, do you still need access? If not, it's going to go away. And that is a fundamental shift in terms of how we provision access and applications to our users, and it can include external users. And I want to be really specific to make sure you understand that we can actually bring in an external company and expose our applications and our tools to them through this product. So let's say you have a scenario where you have an external company that's doing some work for you, right? Maybe they're building you a website. What you need is a team of 3 web developers. What you don't need is specifically Steve, Larry, and Bob. You don't care if it's Steve, Larry, and Bob. You don't care if it's Steve, Larry, and Janine. Doesn't matter. You just need 3 web developers. What we can actually do is expose our identity governance packages out to these other organizations such that if the organization says they're part of this team that does it, they can request the access and you don't have to go back through and vet all these people individually. Now there's a level of trust in that. Obviously it's not zero, right? So it moves a little bit away from the zero trust model, but the point is that we can be flexible now and say, listen, I, as the company, trust you to bring in somebody who can do what I need them to do, and I don't need to babysit this process. That is huge. That is a massive improvement in the abilities of us to keep our systems up and running and just deliver success. And then we can take all of those accesses, and whether they're internal users or external users or whatever we want to do, and apply conditional access policies to make sure that, again, the right people are getting in with the right level of access to the right things at the right time from the right devices. So with any one of these things, we can run a what if policy, or we can actually run these things in report only. So we can build a policy out and say, just turn it on a report only and tell me what would really happen right now if I applied this to the CEO, right? So we have a lot of different capabilities that pull very heavily on these things, and we can even define network locations to be places that are trusted so that users do not get prompted for some of these challenges if they're, say, within the corporate barriers. Not necessarily saying that's the right way to go for it, but you certainly have that ability. Now, what I'm getting to with all of this and this discussion around opening this up to third-party identity, okay? Bear with me here. It's about to get to be a really crazy roller coaster. Decentralized identity, the identity of the future, right? It's Dippin' Dots in the cloud. We are probably coming to about the end of where we will go with developing solutions where we will create and manage a full identity for human beings, right? There are all sorts of regulatory frameworks out there all over the world that are starting to say you have to be able to, as a corporation, give users back control of their identity. And that's a good thing, because there's some really great things that happen with it. Users gain the ability to change their own last name when they get married. They have the ability to change their contact information. They have the ability to say, I don't want to do business with you anymore, and delete their identity out of your systems so that you don't have to, right? So you don't have to worry about protecting the content of information about that user. What we're getting to, and where we have a product built around now in the Azure space, and I'm not here to sell it to you, but this is where it's going, is this idea that we will be able to have, as Contoso, bringing in a person from Fabricam, Fabricam will be able to say, you, Jane, are a Fabricam employee. Jane then will present the credential to Contoso, which will then be able to go back over to Fabricam in real time and verify that Jane is Jane. Jane works for Fabricam, and Jane works for Fabricam right now. And that Jane has access to the resources that should give her access into the applications that are part of that program that we are then allowing Fabricam users to access to develop our website. See, it all kind of comes together, right? Decentralized identity kind of does fly a little bit in the face of the idea of one identity for everything. But again, if the user's managing it, who cares, right? Let them bring the credential and attach all the attestations and all the claims to that credential that they want, and we'll work with that, and that's fine. But we'll be able to resolve it across public and private chains to verify that it's accurate and up to date right now. We already have the capabilities for doing the identity hubs, and capabilities now are part of the Microsoft Authenticator, and it's going to be compatible, or it actually already is compatible with existing open standards. So understand that the identity governance capabilities in Azure Active Directory are designed to support this. Yes, we are doing identity based off blockchain and distributed ledgers and all kind of fun stuff like that. Some components of this are already out in the market today. Some are not, some are still in development, but Microsoft has the ability right now as part of Azure Active Directory to support verifiable credentials. And again, that does mean we don't need to collect, store, or protect identity data. It's built on blockchain, so we can always get the full history of everything that's going on with this thing. And again, it puts the users back in control of identity. And that really becomes powerful, because once that happens, there is no difference between corporate IAM and customer IAM. So no enterprise versus customer IAM. It's all just IAM. It's all one space, one user, one human being. I, as an individual human being, go to work for Contoso, and I've already got an identity that I have spent years cultivating. It's got all of my information about how to get in touch with me, what I do, what my skills and proficiencies are, and you simply consume it as Contoso and expose applications to me, much the same way that you would give me the door code when I walk in the door, much the same way that you would give me a desk to sit at or access to printers. And when it's time for us to dissolve that relationship, you simply tear it down. I tear down my side, we go on about our business. And that is really where the future of identity is going. And that is something that Azure Active Directory is building on today, building up today to be ready for the future. Whereas Active Directory has seen $0 investment from Microsoft since 2016 and is not getting any updates. In fact, I was looking at the preview release content for Windows Server 2022 recently. and there's nothing new for Active Directory. We are still running on schema level 2016. So with that, I am going to throw it back to Christina to see if there are any questions in the queue. I do deeply apologize for the times that we lost internet connectivity here, but happy to open it up for any questions you guys may have.
All right, awesome job, Adrian. I know that was a lot of content to unpack in an hour. You did a great job, as always. And yes, again, sorry, the internet issues, but as a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email with the recording. And then, Adrian, did you say the presentation as well? Would you like to send?
Yes, yeah, I'm going to make sure that you have that deck to distribute.
Yep. So attendees will receive the recording to this webinar and a copy of the presentation by tomorrow. In the future, please be sure to keep up with us on social and check our events page for more upcoming webinars. And if you have any questions, obviously we're about to open it up to Q&A, but if you'd like to learn more, Adrian actually published a blog on this this month that you can find on our website that I know that from reviewing it, it's detailed, it's jam-packed with good stuff. So yeah, with that, I open it up to y'all. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A feed right now, but if you have one, we're on the line. Also, Adrian's email is there if you'd like to contact him directly. So with that, yeah, thank you, everyone. Feel free to drop any questions or that's it. Thank you so much.